Welcome to Data-Driven Sports Betting. I'm A-Train Bets and I use my brain to make bets. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the funnel of finding sports bets with A-Train Station. And so what you think about like sending out a resume. Think about finding a job search. In this case, we're going to compare finding bets and making bets to finding a job and taking a job. The first step in a job search is that you're going to write your resume and send out your resume to whoever will take it, right? You want to get that resume out in the world because it's not the resume that gets you a job. The resume gets you an interview, and that interview, if that series of interviews goes well, then that'll get you a job offer for you to consider, and then you will decide whether or not to take the job. So the first step in prospecting for a job is writing a resume and then sending it out. Let's compare that to in sports betting with A-Train Station. Our first step is setting our weightings, which is how we're going to assess the market of information, all the information out in the world, to get us to a list of bets. So we have default weightings. You could use a single sharp book strategy of weightings. You could use a few sharp books. You could adjust these things however you want to. And all it's doing is gathering different collections of possible bets. There's thousands and thousands of bets out there. And we're running calculations based on whatever you set these weightings to be to determine, okay, what is that list of bets that might meet our criteria for ultimately making a play? Just like when you're sending out resumes, you're not going to send them to every business in the world. You're going to send them to businesses you think there might be a small chance, a possibility that they may have a job that might fit your particular skill set that you may ultimately want to take. You're not going to waste your time sending resumes to everyone, but you're going to send resumes to those who think there's any chance that you might want to play. That's what these weightings do here. We're looking for that first layer of possibility. So in this case, I want to use a strategy of 3 sharp books. This is one that I'm often doing on the live stream. We're going to do one for BetOnline, one for Caesars, and one for Pinnacle. We're just going to focus in on the sharp books that we know are in this list. We're going to save the weightings, and that's going to bring us to step 2. So in a job search, what is step 2? Well, companies have received your resume, and they're going to call you for interviews. If they're going to look at you and say, oh, these skills fit something that we would have, now they're going to call you for an interview. And then you're going to decide, do I take the interview? Do I go to the interview? All of that. But so the next step, our equivalent in A-Train Station in finding bets, is this stage of filtering and sorting, grouping these into a collection that gives us what we want to have with the strategy. So the weightings are just looking at the market. This is going to help us fine tune where are the real opportunities worth looking at. Well, you can see we have the orange means that I've already made this play. So we're probably not going to want to have those. So let's get rid of those by hide already bet. Yellows are when we've made a similar play or bet on the same player for something else, so that we may still be interested in those. Minimum EV percent, I will often set that to 1.5%. Because I don't want to go all the way down for 1%. But in this case, let's leave it at 1%. That's our kind of floor, which just helps us overcome some of the uncertainty of the market analysis, because all of this is some shades of gray to determine what market truth is. So you need a little bit of margin of error. So 1% is kind of the bare minimum there. But let's say, you know what, we're feeling a little bit more conservative than normal today. Let's do max odds, where we only want to focus on things that are not too big of underdogs. So let's go to 200 on the max odds instead of 250. But let's say, you know what, we're willing to take a little bit less certainty from our sharp books and take that up to 6.75% on the hold. So we're willing to go more narrow on the underdog versus favorite, but widen our perspective when it comes to the confidence of the book. The hold is the price that the book is charging to offer both sides of the market. In this case, we're willing to take a little bit of a wider view to that. We have 3 sharp books. Let's see what happens. So we're going to hit OK. And all of a sudden now we have 23 results in 11 events. But because we ran through that second layer, so now we've started to get to this more curated list where you can see it's substantially different than the first list that came in. You know, we have more. Initially, with just the default sorting, we had 18 results in 11 events. Here we have 23 results in 11 events. It's just by looking at different criteria, you start to home in on, in this section, we have these bets that are worth taking a look at? Well, if we think about the parallel, so once you've sent out your resume, people have reviewed it, they've invited you to come and interview. Once you interview, you're going to end up with, in an ideal job search scenario, multiple different job offers. So this is where a business is going to come to you and say, here, we would love for you to come work with us. We think you have the right skills for this position that we have. Here is what we can offer you. Here are the wages. Here's the benefits, all of that stuff. And you look at the total package and you make a decision. Do I take this job or not? Betting works the same way. We now have a list of a bunch of potential bets, just like potential job offers. We have a bunch of potential bets that we can go and analyze and say, okay, what are the merits of this particular bet? Do I want to take this bet? We're not taking this as a job. We don't have to do this bet for the next 10 years of our careers. We just need to do this for about the next 30 seconds while we decide whether or not it's a bet that we want to invest money in, right? So it's a different time horizon which we're making the decision, but we also get to make many of these. It's a little bit of a different decision criteria because we can take many different bets as opposed to just typically having one job at a time. But the analysis methodology largely is very similar. So if we look at this and we say, okay, well, let's take a look at this Ole Miss Rebels and Kentucky Wildcats. What do we see going on here? In this case, we can see we have a market where there's a lot of movement in these lines, which tells me that this market has been fairly dynamic since it was listed. That's what these lines are, is the odds history. But what you can see is DraftKings has moved pretty substantially further than the rest of this limited market. So if you believe Pinnacle in this case has a good read that this is more or less a coin flip, because you can see here minus 150 and minus 105, that's putting these implied odds right at 104.4 as our no vig line, as our fair odds. What DraftKings is offering at plus 120 is way better than that. And what we see, the holds are actually much lower than what our criteria was searching for. This looks like a pretty darn good play, if you ask me, right? On this overplay at DraftKings at plus 120, we seem to be getting about 25 points of value on top of what Pinnacle was offering and about 15.6 points of value over what the fair odds are. I think this is a great play, right? So you can look at this and say, all right, this is a job I'm taking, baby. Great offer. Thank you. And that's what we do. We go through and we can make these plays because we're looking at it from different perspectives. And the beauty of this is that just like in some cases, some people, they'll have multiple different resumes, but most of us have one resume. We send a bunch of places. When we are setting our weightings, we basically have the opportunity to change that resume entirely, because we could change what criteria we are using at the weighting stage and at that second stage to determine what we think a viable offer would be. And it's through that capability, this funneling mechanism where you have the broadest, highest level through weightings, then you get to another layer of detail through the filtering, and then you look at the individual play details on this. There are so many plays you can find with A-Train Station that you're just not going to find with any other tool, because others don't take that approach of looking at different perspectives. They're just like, hey, everybody gets one resume, you get one job, go, go, go. Everybody does the same thing. And to us, that's not what this is all about. Being a sharp sports bettor is about finding edges. It's about finding these opportunities to see where you can make plays that will lead to positive results over time. So let's look at one more before we call this a video. And let's see, in this case, we have a totally different kind of view into something. Whereas that last play was a DraftKings play that looked really good. Here's a play at FanDuel where we're seeing over 141 in a hook. You've got Pinnacle and Caesars offering sharp lines on this, and you see this plus 134. FanDuel has moved substantially to the right. The rest of the market has not moved nearly as much, but you start to see some of these other books are trailing into that direction as well. You have to ask yourself then, is this a play that you want to make? Because you see this significant line movement that FanDuel has to the right. You have to ask yourself, is this sharp line movement? Is this line movement driven from sharp activity, or is this potentially just driven from a large set of bets that they took, or some other random algorithmic calculation that FanDuel might be doing as they run their NCAA algorithms and setting their lines? We don't know. We don't know. So this one is one where I'm less confident because I see this movement is pretty substantial at FanDuel, and I don't see that kind of movement evident at these other books. I even see opposite line movement at Caesars. Now, granted, I see two fairly sharp books here. I'm interested in this play. I think there's a very good chance that FanDuel has moved too much, but I'm also less inclined to do that. So what do I do in this case? Well, unlike taking a job, you can say, you know what? my recommended wager for my particular bankroll and Kelly criteria is 110, I might say, you know what? I like this bet. I don't love this bet. I don't think I want to bet a full amount of a Kelly recommendation. I might bet $40 or $50 on this and say, okay, I think there's real edge here, especially because I have some multiple points of view between a couple other sharp books, both of whom have been updated fairly recently. And when I look at that, I can say FanDuel, yeah, at plus 134, I think that deal's too good to be true. It's going to be 10 points, almost 10 points of value over our no vig odds. I think that's a play I want to make, but I don't want to make it at full beans. I want to make that at some percentage based on my reduced confidence, because I see a couple warning signs in this analysis that I wouldn't otherwise see if I was just looking at a list of the current numbers and be like, ooh, look at FanDuel, that number's bigger, right? So that's the thing. What you need to take away from this is funneling the bets. There's 3 different layers, key different layers. This is the third. This is where you're ultimately deciding, do I take this bet or not? And if I do, how much? But the other layers of our filters, and then going up to the highest level, the weightings, this is how we home in on those bets that we want to play. And then ultimately you have to make the call. How much do I want to bet on this? Sometimes, like with our DraftKings example, we might try to play the full amount because we love everything about the bet. On other cases like this FanDuel play, we might say, you know, this is concerning amounts of movement. We still think there's probably a little value here. We're going to reduce the bet size a little bit. So with that, that's really what I wanted to cover in this video, is just how that core process of prospecting, finding opportunities, homing in on the best ones, and then ultimately making decisions. That's how A-Train Station helps guide you into doing your sharp sports betting in ways that no other tool out there allows you to do. So that's what we think is really important. Whether or not you're using A-Train Station in particular, the core of this filtering mechanism, the core of this filtering methodology, you could do this in potentially different ways. That's what you need to be thinking about. We think our tool does it very well, but there's other ways that you could be executing on this as well. That's up for you to decide. But in the end, we know that start with the broadest level, take different perspectives on that, home in on some details that allow you to get to a workable collection, and then ultimately make the decision. Do I want to make this play or not? And if I do, how much? And with that, for now, this chain is leaving the station. Until next time, save the units for the bros and do your betting. See you next time.